Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dynasty After Dark. I'm your host, Calvin Timms. You can find me over on Twitter at TDC_Calvin or on the Dynasty After Dark YouTube and Rumble channels. And today, thank you for coming back for part 2 of my Ultimate Dynasty Rebuild Guide. I've taken a lot of pride putting this together because one of the biggest issues I think in Dynasty leagues that I've noticed in all of my leagues is a lot of times teams tend to get stuck because they don't know how to rebuild effectively, and they get stuck in either the bottom 4, they're always missing playoffs, or they're stuck right at the edge of playoff teams and they just don't know how to make the push on how to improve their team and really turn around their success multiple seasons. So I wanted to put this guide together, and if you haven't yet, please go over and see part 1 on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to the podcast. And while you're over there, if you don't mind giving the channel a like or the video a like, or the channel a subscription, leave a comment, whatever it is, just to help the podcast and help get this video out there to your league mates. Don't be stingy. Get it out there to your league mates, because the one nice thing about a competitive Dynasty league is it just makes it more fun. If everyone can contend and everyone can compete, then it just makes it a lot more fun. You don't want to just be beating up on guys unless it's for like $1,000 a season. Then okay, maybe I understand, but free money isn't really the most fun money. I want to whoop them while they're competitive at the same time, right? So I wanted to put this guide together to really just help people understand the process of how to rebuild. And if you missed it in part 1, I my first 3 steps, and I've broken it down into 6 steps essentially for the rebuild guide. Steps 1 through 3 were analyze your roster, because the biggest, most important step, the whole key to this whole thing is first you have to look at your roster and you have to be truthful with yourself on what you have, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, where you can improve. And then after that, you can go right into step number 2, making a plan for what your next steps will be. Do I need to contend this year? Do I need to start to look at a rebuild? Am I doing a soft rebuild where I don't need to do everything from the ground up? Maybe I just need 1 or 2 players. And after you have a plan, first thing is to look at upcoming rookies. That's step number 3 here, because knowing what the future holds before you make a plan, and step 4, which I'll get to in 1 second, you have to know what the upcoming class is, because it doesn't help to make a plan if you don't really know what you're working with. That's like saying, make me a McMuffin, and all I have is a box of ingredients. You're not Top Chef, right? You don't know really all the steps that it takes to make me a McMuffin. So you got to know what you're dealing with before you can start to cook with it, right? So those are steps 1 through 3. Analyze your roster, make a plan, and then know the future and the upcoming classes, the upcoming free agents, and things like that. That leads us straight into step number 4 here, which is going to be set goals. So first you make a plan. You have a generic plan, right? The only way to achieve that plan is with goals. You have to set your goals, you have to crush your goals, and then you got to repeat and just keep doing that forever, right? As long as you're in the league. And what does that mean when I say set goals? What exactly do you need to be looking to do in your leagues when I say set goals? That would be the more specific goals. And again, whenever you set a goal or make a plan, it should never be for a specific player, because that's risky. That's just too risky, because you don't know exactly who's available in each one of your leagues, right? If you set a generic goal of get Christian McCaffrey in every single league, well, there might be a league out there where you can't get Christian McCaffrey. So then that goal falls apart, and then your plan just never materializes, right? So you're going to have to look for something else, and that's why I want to have very specific goals, which are like improve your running back position. Like, let's say you analyze your roster and you just really don't feel great about your running backs. Maybe you got 1, 2 guys that are potentially going to be really, really good, but you don't have a lot of depth and you want to improve that. Well, that's a goal. You're not going to say, okay, I'm going to get Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey, because it's unrealistic, right? You got to look and be flexible at the same time while having a specific goal. So that's what I mean by being water a little bit there. You set the overall goal of improving your running back position, but then you're a little bit more fluid in who you're going to target. Maybe you can't get Jonathan Taylor. Maybe you have to settle for someone like James Conner, which I really like for Dynasty right now, or Leonard Fournette, or somebody else that projects to be a top back for this season, but you're not going to be able to nail down exactly until you start to reach out to those owners and see who they're willing to move. So the first thing is to set specific but fluid goals, right? And it could be anything really to help make your plan come together. It could be improve your running back position. Maybe it's trade Baker Mayfield now that he's on the Carolina Panthers, right? And that's one big piece of news that just dropped yesterday. In case you guys haven't heard, Baker Mayfield was traded to the Carolina Panthers, which sucks for Matt Corral, but I actually don't mind it too much. I didn't really expect him to play this year, but I like him still long term. But definitely is a ding to my ego on that one. I still think that Matt Corral is the best quarterback in this class, but we will see how it goes in year number 2 for him, because Baker is going to ball out in Carolina. So maybe that's a goal for you, right? Maybe you have 5 quarterbacks in a super flex league and you need to move some of these guys. Well, maybe your goal is trade Baker Mayfield. It doesn't have to be a super in-depth goal, but just by setting the goal, it makes achieving your plan that much easier, right? Once you start hitting all those goals, the plan will all come together, right? And that's what we need to really improve our roster and improve it for multiple seasons. Now, step number 5, after you've started to set your goals and to achieve your goals, this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. And that's why I have a tip jar here, tips and tricks on what to do to really improve your roster. So it's very easy on paper to say, oh yeah, just get better players and move on from the old players or the bad players. It's very, very easy to say that, but this is where I feel like a lot of podcasts out there don't do a great job of explaining it to you and giving you concrete examples on things you can do to help rebuild your roster. So first off, like I said in last episode, is if you're a contender, this really doesn't apply to you too much because you're not really at risk of not missing the playoffs. That's what makes you a contender. You're set to go for the end of the season, right? You're most likely going to make playoffs and you're going to be able to compete. You might not win, but as long as you're making playoffs, anybody has a chance at that point. So this is more for the guys that are 1-2 people away, or you're just in a full rebuild and you need everything from the ground up. So the first thing is, this is the most controversial one. And I was talking about this actually today with somebody from work, and it's very hard to explain. So I'm going to do my best here, but let me know in a comment down below or over on Twitter if I don't do a good job of explaining this, and I will try to elaborate a little bit further. But essentially, why I say that people should move on from Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel or T. Higgins right now is because of the exact reason what their trade value is. I just got a trade offer today in a league, and I'm kind of in the middle, right? I'm not a contender, but I'm not in full rebuild. I'm kind of 1 or 2 pieces away from being able to really compete in this league, right? So I am in technically a soft rebuild in this league, and I got a trade offer. I need a wide receiver pretty badly, but I don't really know who to go and target because I have a lot of depth at wide receiver, but it's a lot of unproven or injury guys right now, like Jameson Williams or Chris Godwin. Here's the offer that I received just today. Chris Godwin and a 2023 first for Deebo Samuel and Josh Jacobs. Now, that is a very, very tough trade to evaluate, because I would be getting Deebo Samuel and Josh Jacobs, but I'd be giving up a future first and Chris Godwin. The problem with that is I think that Godwin for Deebo is basically a wash, and Deebo right now is going extremely high for his value because he finishes the RB number 2 last year. And I think that you should always, I don't blame this other owner for trying to trade Deebo. You should always try and trade a player who has, one, outlandish season like he just had, like Debo just had, Cooper Kupp just had, Michael Thomas after the catch-setting career year that he had. Always trade guys coming off those years, because the chances that they're going to be able to repeat that year after year is just so astronomically small. And if you can get a good player like a Chris Godwin and a future first, he is giving Josh Jacobs up in the trade. So it's close to a wash. It's very fair. But at the same time, when I look at that trade offer on paper, I would rather have any player in the 2023 draft class over Josh Jacobs, any single player. Now, Chris Godwin versus Debo Samuel. Chris Godwin is injured, right? That's fair. But when they're both fully healthy, it's not that big of a gap between the two. And I know Debo's very good, but if they start to eat into his running usage at all and the transition from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance, that could really impact Debo's usage and his production for fantasy football. The chances of him finishing number 2 overall as the wide receiver again in another season, I would take the field every day of the week in that bet, because it's just not likely to happen. So I'm essentially overpaying to get Chris Godwin to Debo Samuel when I think that in my mind, they're close to a wash. So if you have those guys, if you are in rebuild, if you are trying to maximize your team's return, you should always sell guys coming off a career year like these players, like Cooper Kupp, like Debo Samuel, like Michael Thomas a couple years ago, because they're not going to repeat. It's not that I don't like Debo Samuel. I love Debo Samuel. Debo Samuel is one of my favorite players in the NFL. I'm still upset at the Patriots for not getting Debo Samuel in that draft. We took N'Keal Harry over Debo, and it makes me so upset. I could have had a Debo Patriots jersey. It just frustrates me. But the whole thing is, as much as I love Debo, and I think that he's going to be a very good wide receiver for years to come, I think that Chris Godwin also has that potential. And then I'm giving up a future first for Josh Jacobs, which I just do not love that much. So I don't see that trade as being, it's fair on paper, but for me, it's just a loss because I'm not upgrading in any single position versus what I have. Now, you could say this year it does help me, but Dynasty is not just a one-year thing. I don't just need Debo Samuel for the first, 6-8 games while Chris Godwin gets fully healthy, right? I need production, and I need him to be a better wide receiver than Chris Godwin for the rest of their careers, which I just cannot bank on that, right? After 1 year from Debo. And like I said, I love these players. I love Cooper Kupp. I love Debo Samuel, but it's just, you always trade a guy when they're at their peak value for whatever haul you can get for them. And that's the biggest tip that I can give to anybody in rebuild. You take these players and you sell them. You sell them for a haul and you get multiple pieces back, and you try and just limit your risk a little bit there. Now, another thing is, like, for example, Debo Samuel, if I had Debo and I was going to trade Debo at this time, right, who would I be targeting? Certain wide receivers that I'd be targeting. Hollywood Brown is one. If you can get Hollywood Brown and a piece back, that's a great trade in my opinion. If you could get someone like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I should have had a list of names, but this all just kind of came to me. But if you could get someone like Cortland Sutton plus a pick back, if you could get, because wide receivers are just so close, Brandon Cooks and a wide receiver back, it's just the wide receiver position is so close that it really doesn't make that much of a difference between Cortland Sutton and Debo Samuel out if he comes back down to earth, right? And that extra piece, you're getting another piece on top of it. So that's the best way to maximize your value in Dynasty for years to come, right? You take a good piece, you get 2 pieces back, they become good pieces, right? And then you trade them for 2 pieces back, and that's how you just continuously increase your depth in your leagues, and you just are able to compete every single year. That's that's just what you need to do to maximize the value on your squad for multiple seasons. So the second tip that I have for you is to buy risky players. And what do I mean by that? The risky players are the guys that have the injury prone label, right? Too many times now I've seen the injury guys just not get injured again, and everyone faded them because they were injury prone, but in reality they just had an unlucky stretch of injuries, right? Joe Mixon, perfect example. He's been very good despite having the injury prone label. Keenan Allen, injury prone, has not had an injury really. He's missed like 1 or 2 games a year for the last like 4 years, and he was injury prone. Nobody wanted Keenan Allen in coming off his lacerated kidney and his torn ACL that year. There's a few guys around the league. Cam Akers, injury prone. He tore his Achilles. He played 6 months later, and people are fading him because of the injury. Buy those risky players. Travis Etienne is another guy. J.K. Dobbins is another guy. DJ Chark coming off the ACL. You buy them when they're on their lowest dip, right? Because we've seen what these guys can do when they're healthy. We haven't seen Travis Etienne, to be fair, but we saw what he could do in college. And most running backs who are very productive in college are able to translate that to the NFL 9 times out of 10. So Travis Etienne, we're going to be able to see what he can do, and you can get him for such a cheap value compared to what he's actually going to be after he has a good year, right? Let's say he plays a whole year and he doesn't get injured. He's going to just spike up in value. So you're buying him at his lowest point. So go buy those players that are injury prone and get them for cheap, right? So that's the biggest second tip. And this is something that comes with trading a player that's coming off a good year. Maybe you trade Deebo Samuel for Cam Akers and Travis Etienne. We'll just throw that out there, right? I doubt you'll be able to get that, but you never know. We'll say, or Cooper Kupp. We'll say you trade Cooper Kupp for those 2 players. Maybe it's Devonta Smith and Travis Etienne. That is a huge steal because you're going to be able to get way more production from those 2 players if they are able to at all return to form. And yeah, it's just going to be such a massive steal for you in your league. So tip 1 and tip 2, they definitely start to go together there. Some generic tips when you're looking at trade candidates. You want to try and, if you can, older players in Dynasty are they're like the plague. Nobody wants to go near them. They have like leprosy, like the olden times in the Middle Eastern countries. If you had leprosy, just everyone avoided you no matter what. But sometimes the older players can really perform well for fantasy football. Now, it depends on the position, but like look at Tom Brady at the quarterback position. The dude is still just putting up numbers for fantasy football, and he's going into his age 45 season. You could have had him for the last 3 years, and he'd been able to put up massive numbers, but everyone was too chicken to go buy him because he's so old, right? And I get it. I really, really do. Aaron Rodgers is another guy. He's back-to-back MVP for fantasy or for real football. He's been very good for fantasy football, but people don't want to invest in him because he's older, right? Aaron Rodgers could play until he's 45. He's in very, very good shape, but nobody wants to invest that. The problem is everyone looks at Dynasty as a 10-year window, right? It's 1 year and 10 year for Dynasty football. That's all it is. Either I'm going to win this year or I'm going to win for the next 10 years. There's no in between. In reality, you need to be looking at 2 to 3 year windows. You don't need to be looking at just this year. You want to make sure you can compete this year, but at the same time, you want to be able to make sure you have a good player for next year and the year after as well. And after that, you don't really care. You can move on from them if they're underperforming. You don't need to worry about 5 years down the road. Someone like, for example, Jalen Waddle, love the talent, really, really do. Very, very good player. He's probably going to have a very good NFL career. 3 years from now, he could be out of the NFL. We have no idea. We love what we've seen from him so far, but look at Henry Ruggs, right? Completely crazy off the field incident, but he's out of the league. He's never going to play football again. You never know what is going to happen. And I know that's an outlier case, but you just never know what is going to happen. So the biggest thing is buy older players. Don't be afraid to invest in them if you think that they're going to be an upgrade for your team for this year, maybe next year, and maybe one more year. James Conner, I think that he's a huge steal right now, and I think that he'd be a very big upgrade for most people's number 1 or number 2 running back on their team. but because he's 26 years old, nobody wants to invest in him. So I just think that it's silly a little bit to avoid older players. Try and don't let that rule you completely. It's always nice to have a roster of studs that are like 23 years old. I get it. I understand that. But at the same time, we got to be realistic. Older players definitely produce for fantasy still as well. So don't be afraid of older players. There's a tip there for you. When you're targeting future players that haven't been able to produce too highly just yet, wide receivers that I love to target are year 2 wide receivers that didn't produce amazingly well in year 1, but they have like pretty high draft capital with them. Someone like Devonta Smith is someone that would be on my radar right now. And I don't like Devonta Smith, but I think that he's such a value right now that you'd have to look at it. But year 2 wide receivers, if they don't put up a massive just production in year 1, people just write them off because the redraft mindset has infected dynasty football so poorly that people just are ready to write off players just left and right anymore. And it's crazy to me. It is absolutely crazy. For example, Curtis Samuel, wide receiver for the Washington Commandos, right? 25-year-old wide receiver. He is 25 years old. He could go on and play until he's 34, and we'd be able to have 9 years of him. Now, will he be able to light the league on fire? More than likely not, but you never know, like I just said. And everyone just does not want to touch him with a 10-foot pole because we've seen it for 3-4 years. He's been injury riddled a little bit. He never really got to play in Washington when he got over there. And he's just an extremely cheap option. Maybe he never becomes anything, but everyone is just ready to write these players off just completely despite their age, So you can still get really young wide receivers. You can really get young running backs, Cam Akers, for example, and people are just ready to write them off because they haven't been able to produce last year. So just think about that for your players that you're targeting. Year 2 wide receivers, year 3 tight ends, that's typically when they try to break out or start to break out in fantasy football. It takes them about 3 years to really learn the ins and outs of being a tight end at the NFL level. So if they can break out before that, that's great. Mark Andrews comes to mind right there, George Kittle, somebody like that. But for example, I think Noah Fant was someone who really started to come into his own in year 3, but it's just something that we've seen quite a bit from year 3 tight ends. If you're going to go buy one, that's what I would typically target there. That's all the tips and tricks that I have right now, but there's so much more that can go into a dynasty rebuild podcast. But if you're looking for more advice, please be sure to follow me over on TDC_Calvin on Twitter or comment on the video with any questions that you might have. I would love to help people just be able to turn around their rosters. And I've done this for a couple years now where I do a roster review, give you strengths and weaknesses privately, typically in DMs and everything like that. And people always say that I give them great advice. I really help people with their rookie drafts and trade targets and things like that. But people never give me the credit out in public. And I'm not going to point any fingers over here, but I love to help people. That's why I created this podcast. I'm doing this not for me. Like, I don't get anything from getting up here and talking. I could just continue to do what I'm doing and continue to win in my leagues, but it doesn't help me because I want to help everyone else. It makes me feel better when I can help other people improve their roster. So please, if you have any questions that you're thinking of in this tips and tricks, please be sure to comment over on the video or reach out on Twitter, and I'd be happy to help. So the last step number 6, is going to be profit. If you follow all these tricks, if you follow all these steps, I guarantee you that you're going to improve in dynasty football. You might not be the year-to-year title holder like Kamaru Usman over here, but you will be able to compete year in and year out. It takes a little while. I'm not going to say you can do this in 1 year, but I was able to fully rebuild a roster It's a roster that finished number 2 overall in a startup season, but it was very old. It didn't have the best players on it, and it was really, really risky, right? So I decided to burn it to the ground and start from scratch, essentially. And in 1 year, I have one of the deepest rosters in the entire league, although my biggest issue now is I'm missing some of those elite players at the top, right? But hopefully some of the guys on my team can mature into those elite players, but it will take some time to tell that. But I did that in 1 year by following these. I looked at my roster. I analyzed my roster. I decided that my assets that I had on my team are, 1, they're about to age out, so that's not great. 2, they're falling off for fantasy football, so that wasn't great either, right? So they're getting older and they're starting to fall off. That is a terrible situation. So you sell those guys while you can to get all the value, maximize the value on your team. But I looked at all my guys and I decided that I just cannot compete in this league. I just did not have the firepower. The number 2 finish was a fluke, and I fully admitted that. But after I looked at my roster, I started to make a plan. Okay, I need to start to improve. I need to improve in this year. I need to make a plan. I'm going to start a full rebuild. I'm starting from scratch. It's not going to be partial. I'm not going to go into the season thinking that I can compete when I know that I can't. In my heart of hearts, I know that I could not compete with that team. So I burned it to the ground, made a plan on how to do it, looked at the draft class. At the time, I thought the 2022 draft class was going to be a little bit better. Some of the running backs that went back to college kind of hurt that first round class, but it'll be all right. But I looked at the upcoming guys. I targeted some of the future free agents, and I've just been able to turn around the team. Then I set goals. I wanted to improve. I wanted to get someone like Trey Lance. I wanted to get someone like Justin Fields on their down years. I traded all of my high pieces and traded for future capital, bought into 2022 more than I probably should have, but it didn't hurt me too much. I actually quite like the guys that I did manage to get from this year's draft class, but I made a plan, set goals, and achieve those goals. Now the only step is to profit, and maybe it's not this year. Maybe 1.5, 2 years is going to be all I need for the rebuild to be complete. But I have picks and I have capital for next year's draft class as well. So I'm looking good in the team, in the league, and I think that I'll be able to make a good competitive push this year and then hopefully make playoffs and get there. And I did that all in 1 year. I almost flipped my entire roster in one season to one of the deepest in the league. So if I can do that in a competitive high dollar league where people are stingy as hell, you can do it in any of your leagues as well. I believe in you. So please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the video. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you guys. Again, follow me over on Twitter. Hit me up with any advice that you guys are looking for. Again, this is only the surface level. An hour on a Dynasty rebuild is not enough time. I fully admit that. But I'm trying to give you the best, most practical advice for rebuilding that I can without trying to drone on just too much for all of these videos. So follow me over on Twitter. Hit me up with any comments, questions that you might have. Excuse me. Follow me over there. Excuse me. Hit me up with any questions, and I would be happy to help you out, help you flip your team as well. Thank you guys so much, and good night.